Hello, everyone. Today I want to kind of um, word vomit at you. And I only want to do this because I don't think I can kind of convey what I want to say any other way. As I still don't know what I will title this video, but I essentially just want to talk about various ideas I've come across through my recent reading of various texts and how and kind of reflect on how some of these ideas have popped up in my in my real in my real life, I guess. Not that reading is in a different place to my own real life, but anyway. Um, I think I was kind of hesitant to start this video because I didn't feel like I was ready to properly talk about some of these ideas. However, I think now I just kind of need to get it out of my system. I have always had trouble talking and articulating certain things, and I often kind of and ah. Um, there you go. Which, might be a certain kind of unconscious, which is a spoiler for what we'll be talking about, reaction to a sense of insecurity or imposter syndrome around certain topics and my inexperience with certain topics. But um, in the past year, I found that I basically cannot function in a creative manner in how I want to function if I were to just plan out everything beforehand. This kind of comes across a lot of the time in my writing, where uh, maybe a bit earlier into my degree, I was very set on kind of having a kind of set plan all the time for everything I want to say. Presentations, essays, I would plan it out before I would write. And I would, complete some quite well structured, although pretty, I would say, orthodox ideas. And I would be able to communicate them in a kind of clear, straightforward, and conventional manner. And then I eventually stopped doing that. I think there are two major factors for this. There are probably many more, but there are two that I can kind of articulate. One is that I basically became more confident in my own ability to uh, get things wrong. Um, I guess beforehand, when I would write, this could be a first draft, this could be, anything. If it was bad, I would think that I was a bad writer. But now I kind of find that I'm always going to be a bad writer on my first uh, initial go. And that I will kind of um, actually start to discover what I am trying to say on my second and third rewrite. This is not a new thing that I've come up with. This is obviously rewriting is such a kind of is the only practice for writing, right? But I think the kind of switch I made was that I became okay with, and also even not even okay, but even embracing uh, letting myself write as badly as possible on my first go. Anything that was kind of on theme, get it on the page. Because, it's a cliche, but it's true. The hardest part is starting. And I think this kind of, and then the second reason as to why I began to allow myself to just word vomit or just blurt out things is because of the kind of growing and extremely rapid pervasiveness of AI, especially in the universities, right? Where originally, when I was a first year, it was all about clear structured essays, simple essays, which state your point, state how you're going to make your point, reflect on how you made your point, restate your point, right? But then as AI generators became much more kind of, they weren't this kind of dystopian fantasy, and they became, an actual kind of presence in my classes. Uh, there was a kind of limbo period, and we're still in this limbo period where teachers will mark essays um, with the notion that AI doesn't exist. Um, and this was kind of quite hard because they used to mark essays basically about how clear was your argument, how well structured was your essay. But, you know, you can easily generate an essay which is clear and well structured. Easily. It's literally what the tool is for. It might not be a thoughtful essay. Might not be. It will probably not be imaginative. It will definitely not be original. But it will be clear and it will be well argued, and it could be well researched depending on what prompts you put in. But I've seen recently that now, because of this presence of AI, this massive presence, the marking has begun to be adapted, at least in my classes, which, to be fair, do lean on the kind of more forward thinking, less doomer side of things, which I'm sympathetic to as well. And essentially, what has come to be is that now originality has become the kind of thing they look for in essays, where it used to be just well structured, boring essay, right? That's good. But now they kind of like this kind of, when kids will just kind of create these experimental, uh, weirdly structured, maybe meandering, but nonetheless like original ideas, kind of human, even though I don't really like to use that, but human, I guess, in feel. Um, but yeah, anyhow, I think that kind of will get. That's my kind of reflection uh, on the word vomit that has kind of taken over my ability to express myself, and how I've kind of come to accept that. Where when I was a kid, or when I was a bit younger, it was a great insecurity. But I think this will kind of bring us to our first kind of notion that I take from one of these books, which is one of them is Freud's Civilization and Its Discontents. And it's this notion of a hyperhumanism. Now, Freud doesn't actually, use the phrase hyperhumanism, but it's a phrase that I've found in other places, usually in kind of AI journals and stuff like that. But it's a phrase that comes up for me when I read this text. Uh, in this text, Freud is basically talking about the sacrifice that the subject has to make in order to uh, live in the safety of a civilization. They have to tame their instinct, their aggressiveness, in order to live. But because of this taming, they have a perpetual unhappiness, an eternal, internal sense of guilt. But anyway, in this, Freud talks about how basically to get away from suffering, humans tend to try to disconnect themselves. They try to, this is all Freud's thinking, right? They try to kind of escape and place their ego or their consciousness as transcendent from their environmental surroundings, from their bodily senses, right? It's a mind body, it's a kind of a commentary on the mind body thing, where the enlightened man views himself as kind of separate, as well as the causer, as well as the master of nature. And Freud sees that as trying to escape his own suffering. And see, here's where I kind of pull together all of what I've been talking about. I, for me, this kind of, made me think about AI, right? Where AI and artificial intelligence seems to me as the kind of endpoint of this transcendent hyperhumanism. You know, where we are so human, we are so transcendent of nature that we kind of leave our physical bodies and become fully artificial digital beings, which do not have senses, are not attached to the external world, and are able to kind of cause things in a kind of separated sense, in a disconnected sense. Disconnected, right? And I think that is a kind of that is honestly an ideology of some people in this kind of tech world. However, you know, one always needs to think that although we kind of view these these AI generated things as kind of artificial, ghost-like. I think of the movie Ghost in the Shell, right? Transcendent, disconnected from the natural world. We still need to realize, and this is the kind of new materialist perspective uh, coming through, that these things are matter. They're not disconnected from the real world. They're not kind of transcendent things. They are made up of natural materials that occur on Earth as any other kind of product does, right? They are the kind of they are, you know, they are made out of the earth as anything. They are matter, right? And in that way, they cannot be transcendent. And in that way, the hyperhumanism movement will always be fetishistic. And this moves us on to our next conception, which I get from the late, great Karl Marx, right? In Capital, which I've been reading. He talks about commodity fetishism. Now that I say that, I am scared that I am mispronouncing fetishism, even though I'm, you know, totally sure I could pronounce it, but that's just me. But anyway, for Marx, fetishism is the way in which uh, commodities are seen to kind of come out of thin air and just appear. And we don't think about the kind of social relations and the labor time and the labor power that have been put into and actually produce those commodities. In that way, for me, even though I think this is a little kind of murky, this kind of fetish idea is a, you know, kind of alike to Foucault's and Nietzsche's genealogical method, wherein which uh, the kind of naturally occurring things, or things that uh, kind of presumed to come out of thin air, are pulled into the political and the historical and are given a history, And as Marx would say, the veil of the fetish is removed and we can see what is happening. And I think the same I think we see that with AI, where kind of we think of it as, this kind of almost fantastical magical thing where it generates things out of, answers out of thin air, and it kind of has its own kind of unhuman, unnatural consciousness. But it's not true, right? That's a fetish. That's fetish thinking. We have to remove the veil, and we have to see the kind of social relations, the labor time, and the labor power that are going into these AI generated chatbots, right? The generations that they have are them kind of pulling from many different people's work and labor and giving it to you. Their kind of systems are not being, are not doing it on their own. They're kind of the result of a huge amount of labor by numerous people. So I guess, and that kind of brings me to this feeling where, you know, the fetish, I think, could be honestly its own perspective, right? It's such a brilliant idea. It seems that, you know, everywhere I look now, I notice that I am kind of, that there's a fetish kind of now only half kind of blocking my vision. And another place I can see this fetish is in kind of meat, the meat industry, right? Where, you know, uh, as kind of we don't think about where our meat actually is coming from. We know where it's coming from usually, but it doesn't really kind of affect us, right? There is a kind of fog, a kind of nice warming fog, right? When, we're kind of chowing down on fast food um, meals, we don't think about how is this how is this kind of chicken, what has this chicken been through to become this meal for me? Also, um, what has happened to the human who has had to make this chicken into this food for me, right? What kind of conditions are they in? We don't really think about that. So the fetish is everywhere, not just food, but in, every industry. It's a, as Marx would say, it's a kind of and this isn't a natural thing, right? This is a historical development unique to the capitalist mode of production, right? Consumers. Um, Now, on a more positive note, here's where I bring back Freud. So recently, I've been reading Freud, and I've also started this great book by Elizabeth Gross, which is a book on a feminist introduction to Lacan. And in both of these, I'm very much struck by, and this is might be very obvious to people who are more more familiar with psychoanalysis, but I am not, right. I kind of in my early degree, I kind of maybe even got mixed up between psychology and psychoanalysis, and I didn't even really know what was going on. And I was so kind of Foucault pilled, for lack of a better word, that I really believed in how everything had a history and how everything is socially constructed, and, in a certain sense, like, um, kind of everything is from a human's perspective, but I don't believe that anymore, basically. But what I'm really loving, this is so kind of obvious. But what I'm really loving from these psychoanalytic perspectives is the unconscious, right? And this kind of unconscious, which um, which Gross talks about, at the very start, where she's just kind of introducing Lacan's and Freud's um, key notions, or I should say Freud's key notions, where the unconscious is not a submerged consciousness, a rational system that is somehow invisible. It is an entirely other form of reason, logic, and pleasure, one not reducible to those available to consciousness. It undermines the subject's conscience, aspirations by its sim- symptomatic intrusions in behavior which are uncontrolled by and may even be unknown to consciousness. So it's not this kind of like link or anything. It's a completely different rule set of pleasure, of knowing, of being. It's a completely different thing which the person might not be even aware of. And for Freud anyway, we kind of try to oppress this, like I was saying earlier, when it comes to suffering. These kind of urges that we don't know about because we want to know about ourselves. We want this kind of self knowledge. And this kind of goes into Nietzsche, his whole idea of life negation, where we try and kind of, in the hopes of getting some sort of control because we don't actually know what's going on with our minds, we try and kind of make ourselves diligent to certain things. That could be religion, or that could be a diet, or that could be a schedule, right? It's a kind of sense of control and induced kind of suffering, which is better than the kind of unconscious that we don't know anything about, really. Um, but through that uh, preemptive control that we try and put ourselves through, Nietzsche only kind of finds a kind of life negation where we kind of are just like these like kind of bored, boring people who don't want to really experience the emotiveness and pleasures of life, right? But Freud, which I really appreciate, Freud finds the kind of erotic, right, in that negation, where if you negate something enough, it becomes pleasurable, it becomes erotic, it becomes a fetish. Kind of a different way of fetish, though. And I think this has really been kind of mind blowing for me because it's like, yeah, that's true. You know, um, since it was just Christmas time, there's been lots of kind of sweets and stuff around. Some really lovely food around. But I'm like this, right? I like to, or I kind of, yeah, I love to kind of control myself, and because it puts me in a sense of kind of order. But with, all these sweets around, they are all the more kind of pleasurable and alluring because uh, I'm so kind of obsessive about only eating a certain amount of them, right? It kind of gives an explanation for kind of binge eaters who kind of are on a really, really, really strict diet for a long time in a kind of unhealthy way, and then they'll just binge because they can't kind of control the kind of they can't control it, and through controlling it, the binge kind of becomes more alluring, right? I think that's where I'm going to stop my ramble. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to get out of this, is just a few reflections on some Freud and Marx that have been really kind of enjoyable for me to think about, and honestly, in a Freudian sense, almost therapeutic. This has been kind of cathartic. But anyway, thank you very much.